Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Here's Perry, to Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Jumps to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it! Into Booker. Here's the three. Suzanne! Another Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. Whammo time! He got it! Suzanne! Oh, brother!
Welcome to the 7 Seconds or Less podcast. Here is where we talk about the NBA with a Phoenix Suns focus. My name is Max McCauley, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, David Nash. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Max. It's Saturday morning here, and just when we think there won't be any Suns news to talk about, something always pops up.
Yeah, even on a random Friday afternoon in Phoenix, something can happen for the Suns, which we'll get to in just a second. But first, thought I'd introduce what we're going to do today, and not just today, but for the next 5 or so weeks. We're going to start a position pod series, David.
We are, I guess, just as I touched on, the news is going to dry up if it hasn't already, and we've decided to go a little bit more in-depth on the whole roster, I suppose, breaking it up, as you said, as a episode per position.
Yep, and we're going to have a lot of great guests for this series. We're really excited about it. Today, though, it's just us. We're starting with, I think, maybe the most controversial of the position spots. We're going to start with small forward, and I'll tell you, Dave, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think this is going to be the one where you and I argue the most.
Yeah, we obviously chat privately quite a lot on text and things outside of the pod, and I definitely think it's not a stretch to say that we disagree the most on this position and what the Suns should do this season.
Okay, before we get into that, though, we mentioned there's some Suns news today, and there's also some other news we want to get to, and people seem to like our rapid-fire news segment last week, so we're going to do it just like that. Let's start with the one that happened today that you referenced earlier, David. The Suns, as reported by our friend Evan Sidery, they signed Isaiah Canaan.
They did sign Isaiah Canaan. I was a little bit surprised by this, mainly because I did think it was actually something that was going to happen a couple of months ago, and then I, to be perfectly honest, just forgot about Canaan a little bit. I did think that the Suns might come and give Canaan an opportunity to rehab himself and get back on an NBA roster, and here it is. I'm glad that Evan reported in a follow-up that it was a non-guaranteed deal and he'll be fighting for his spot in training camp, and that brings the roster to 18 players, I believe, for training camp. So the Suns could potentially add a couple more and give Igor some pieces to battle out some of these position battles off the bench, maybe. So, yeah, interesting thoughts. But what about preseason? That also came up since we last recorded, Max. Any thoughts on the 5 games that the Suns have got locked in there?
I'm excited for the New Zealand game because it's always fun to watch the Suns beat up on some foreign team.
The game against Brisbane last year was the one Suns good win for the preseason, and probably should have been a reason why we noticed that the season was going to start off pretty badly for the Suns.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was actually at that game. That was fun because it was just so clear that Devin Booker was just infinitely better than everybody on the other team.
But as our good buddy Chris Koffel on Twitter noticed, that the Suns like to play Portland, it seems, in preseason.
They do it a lot, and I think I'm going to go to that Portland game on the Friday night. I think it might be the 5th of October. So if any listeners are there, come meet up. Let's say hi. Let's move on though. So another thing that happened, this Shaq Harrison $50K guarantee. You want to talk about that? Yeah.
So August 1st, he was owed $50,000 as part of his first guarantee, and the only other thing I'd touch on there is, I think back when Reed was guaranteed, it was kind of misreported a little bit that Shaq was guaranteed to be on the team. I think the Suns had made the decision to keep Shaq around, but he's actually not officially fully guaranteed until the last date possible, which is January 10. So I expect Shaq to start the season with the Suns, but they definitely still have some flexibility there with his roster spot and his salary. What about Devin Booker, Max? I think since we last recorded, there was lots of clips about Devin with Team USA.
I'm wondering how many people, when you started talking about Devin Booker, thought you were going to refer to the Drake lyrics.
That's another interesting thing that happened, but not something I'm terribly interested in, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything, but it's kind of cool to have your players shouted out by a rap superstar. But yeah, Booker on Team USA at the mini camp, that's great. I mean, obviously it's good to have him get that experience with those guys. I think it's probably unrealistic that he would make the 2020 Olympic team. I mean, obviously if he breaks out as a superstar, it's possible. But yeah, there's a lot of guys in line in front of him. But I would guess that he's maybe among the favorites for the 2024 Olympic team. Last piece of news here. This isn't Suns related, David, but LeBron opened a school.
He did. It was probably the biggest news of the NBA in the last week or so, and I thought worthy of touching on because no matter what you think about LeBron as the player, I absolutely love him as a player, so there's no qualms with me there, but you definitely can't doubt LeBron the person, and it's a pretty incredible story for someone to go to the lengths that he's going to here with opening this school, so very cool thing to see in the NBA offseason, that's for sure.
I understand that people were bent out of shape over LeBron in 2010 when he made that decision because, that was back when we thought that athletes and teams were loyal to each other, which since has been proven wrong again and again. But at this point, 8 years later, with all the great things LeBron has done on and off the court, it's really hard for me to see why anybody would dislike him anymore.
You just can't, Max. Anyone who does, clearly isn't interested in liking LeBron at all.
All right, David, I think that's it for news, but before we go on to the small forwards, let's do Did You Know?
Yeah, so Max, did you know that since its inception in 1982, the Phoenix Suns have won the Sixth Man of the Year award the most times of any team? Any guesses on how many times out of 36 possibilities that the Suns have won the award?
I'm going to say the other teams have won it 30 times, we've won it 6.
A little less than that. We've won it 4, which was surprising that that's the most. But I guess out of 36 in a 30-team competition, that's not too bad. But Max, I'm going to put you on the spot here, as I like to do. How many of the 4 can you name?
Barbosa.
That's 1.
Man, did Elliot Perry win one?
He did not.
He didn't. I think I overrate him because I liked him so much as a kid, and I liked his socks. Man, I'm drawing a blank right now.
I'll put you out of your misery. Danny Manning won it in 98.
Okay.
But of course, the real reason we're talking about it for this episode is 2 small forwards have also won it, in Eddie Johnson in 1989 and Rodney Rogers in 2000.
Okay.
In the 88-89 season, Johnson came off the bench 63 of a possible 70 games. He averaged 21.5 points, 4.4 rebounds, 2.3 assists. He also shot 49.7% from the field and hit 1 3 a game at 41.3%. Johnson beat out Thurl Bailey from the Jazz and won Dennis Rodman from the Pistons for the trophy. Phoenix happened to also win the most improved that year with Kevin Johnson, whilst Kevin and Tom Chambers finished 8th and 9th in MVP voting. The Suns won 55 games that season, but ended up getting swept by the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. On to Rodney Rogers' season in 99-2000, Rogers blitzed the field with 104 first-place votes. The next best was Cuttino Mobley of the Rockets with just 7, and ex-Suns Cedric Sabalas with 4 for the Mavs. Rogers thoroughly deserved it though, with a season comprising of just 7 starts in all 82 games played, and stats of 13.8 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1.1 steals, and 1.4 threes on 43.9 shooting from deep. The Suns won 53 games and fell to the Lakers again, this time 4-1 in the Western semis. Now, Johnson and Rogers spent 4 and 3 seasons with the Suns respectively before being traded away. You know, I like to look at trades for the Suns, Max, so Johnson didn't get the Suns anything of note, but Rogers was actually in the trade that brought in another small forward in 2001. Any ideas who that might have been, Max?
Oh, jeez. No, but in lieu of that, I just want to say very quickly that I think Eddie Johnson's a fun announcer. I like listening to him, and he gets undeserved hate. But go on.
Good point. It was Joe Johnson this time. The Suns dealt Rogers and Tony Delk for Johnson, Randy Brown, Milt Palacio, and a 2002 first, which later
Tony,
became...
50 points, Delk.
The first later became Casey Jacobson. Max, the current Suns also have another current link to the Sixth Man Award, but I won't put you on the spot with that one. It is assistant coach Corliss Williamson. He took home the award in 2002 with the Pistons. He had 13.6 points, 4.1 boards, and 1.2 assists, and shot 51% from the field, claiming the prize from Bobby Jackson of Sacramento and yet another son, Quinton Richardson, who was with LAC at the time. Williamson, of course, went on to win a title in 2004 with the Pistons, with none other than our new head coach, Igor Kokoskov, as the assistant coach that time around. Max, perhaps the big nasty as they call him, plus Coach Igor can be perfect mentors to teach this team about sacrificing in your role and coming off the bench for the better of the team. I'll end it on that, which seems a nice way to move on to our discussion surrounding the small forward position for the 18-19 season.
That is about as perfect as a segue as you can get, because this conversation is going to be focused pretty closely on who's going to fill what role, right? Because there's a big question here of who's going to start at small forward and who is going to come off the bench. Just to real quickly go over the roster changes. So we had Daniel House last year, he's gone. We had Derrick Jones Jr. last year, he's gone. We added Mikal Bridges. We also added Trevor Ariza, but we're going to not talk about him too much because we're going to consider him as one of the power forwards. Okay, and then we also have Davon Reed. I think we're going to consider him more among the shooting guards than the small forwards.
He'll come up a little more in our shooting guard episode for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, we're going to talk about primarily Mikal Bridges, Josh Jackson, TJ Warren. We're going to talk about who we think is going to start. We're going to talk about who we want to start. And David, do you want to start us off here, because you're going to write an article about this, so you might have the first word on it.
Yeah, I've been working on something that will hopefully be out around the time that listeners are listening to this pod, so that'll be a cool context for them to get some deeper thoughts maybe on what I'm thinking and maybe some video. I will state my intentions early, Max, and say that I think and I also believe that TJ Warren will start for the Phoenix Suns to start the next season.
I'm just going to let you talk because I just vehemently disagree with both of those things.
So I'll quickly lay it out, but I think TJ is a little unheralded as a starter, and I put out a poll very recently kind of gauging what the Suns fan base felt about TJ as a starter, which I suspected would go this way, but about 70% of Suns fans voted for TJ to come off the bench to start the season. I don't disagree moving forward. I've kind of long discussed TJ as being, if he remains on the Suns, kind of a really dynamic sixth man on a contending team. But this isn't a contending team, Max, and I think we need to surround Devin Booker with as much talent as possible. And I think those two actually work quite well together. The numbers certainly support that from last year. So I'm keeping TJ in the starting lineup purely from a talent-based perspective. Match the Suns' intentions of being the most improved team this season. I think you have to have TJ in the starting role, particularly because I don't support Josh Jackson in particular is necessarily beating down the door to make a change there.
Here's my thing on TJ Warren, and it's been my thing, and it will continue being my thing going forward, I think. He has an unreal ability to score around the basket. He has incredible touch. He's just really just an unbelievable finisher. I actually, for once, have basketball reference pages in front of me. I'm actually doing homework for once. The guy shot, for his career, he shot 70% from 0 to 3 feet, which is really, really good. Particularly given that he doesn't really he doesn't have athletic finishes. He has these crazy finishes off the glass. He's just unreal at that. Yeah,
he's a great finisher around the basket, and a noted strength of his extends out a little bit further to the mid range. It's the longer stuff that causes him problems, man.
Yes, it is. He is a woefully bad 3-point shooter, and he's really only just gotten worse. He had that one season, 2015-16, where he shot 40% on a pretty small number of attempts. But otherwise, he's been atrocious, and he's a career 28% 3-point shooter. I think it's hard to have a lot of hope that he'll get better there. Same goes with his defense. His defense has really never been good. A lot of people don't trust advanced stats, but the advanced stats have always been terrible. The eye test isn't much better. I don't know what it is about him. I think it might be a focus issue on defense. He doesn't really. He's not limited size wise, really. He just doesn't play defense.
Yeah, and defense is a pretty hard thing to judge, and in particular, a very hard thing to judge on recent Suns teams. You know, we've had this discussion about Devin Booker and a few other Suns in the last couple of seasons where eye test and stats-wise things don't look great, but no one's really looked great on that end of the floor for the Suns, except for guys that, you know, just go out and put all their effort into the defensive end. Think Shaq Harrison at Summer League, for example. But yeah, we haven't seen great signs from TJ on the defensive end in the last couple of seasons, which is probably my biggest concern in terms of putting him in that starting small forward position. But again, the positives that you're getting out of him being in there on offense far outweigh the current negatives on the defensive end.
Oh, I'm not even close to getting through his negatives. Next, let's go to his playmaking, which is maybe he might be the worst passing forward in the entire NBA. He's in the short list discussion for that. His assist totals have been he's like around like 2 assists per 100 possessions pretty consistently, which is god awful. You just have to watch him play. He has tunnel vision. He doesn't look for anybody ever when he's on the court. It's not something that interests him. He really just goes to the basket both in the half court and in transition. And, you know, listen, not everyone has to be a passer, but if you have just literally no ability to do it, that's a problem. So when you have a player like TJ Warren who he's a D- or an F in categories, the 3 categories I just mentioned, 3-point shooting, defense, and playmaking, it's really hard for him to be on the court unless he's scoring a lot, right? Unless he's like your primary or secondary option, I would say.
Yep. And
do we really want TJ Warren to be our number one option? He's definitely not with Devin Booker. I think we want Ayton to get a lion's share of the offense. We're going to have Brandon Knight, who's obviously a guy who's typically been high usage in his career. It's just to me, I think when I'm trying to build a starting lineup, the idea I have in mind is when I want to maximize Devin Booker first and maximize DeAndre Ayton second, and I just don't see why TJ Warren maximizes those guys.
I definitely agree with you long term. I think in terms of building out a starting 5 that's ready to contend in the NBA, I can't, as I touched on before, I can't see TJ being part of that. But just from what the alternatives are at the moment, and I still rate very highly what TJ does well. I'd prefer to see him in the starting lineup at the moment, just because, you know, I don't really like the alternative of starting Josh Jackson, for instance. I think a lot of the same problems are going to come to the fore, and I think, you know, to touch on the negatives that you spoke about with TJ, there's no denying, you know, the bad 3-point shot. I am hearing that he's been working on it over the off-season, as everybody does. But, you know, let's say he comes back with that not being all that much improved. Maybe a little bit better from the corners would be great. But, you know, I kind of see Igor doing something interesting with TJ in terms of starting him and him being a small forward wing in terms of running the fast break and kind of pushing the pace. Chris Hansen on Twitter tweeted out this week that, you know, he's right up there with kind of fast break points in the entire NBA. So I think that's one reason that you would kind of start him and try and get both Devin Booker and TJ some quick buckets, both of which were in that leaderboard that Chris posted. And then when you get into the half court, I would actually use him as a 4. And I would put Ariza out as the wing, stretching the floor. So it allows you to still have enough shooting on the court and, you know, play TJ kind of on the short roll and use him with Ayton a little bit. This is where I think we disagree mainly in terms of why you would have Warren out there. I think having him out there could actually be a huge benefit to both Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton in terms of having a guy out there who is dangerous around the mid-range and creates a little bit more space for both of those guys.
How does he create space, though? No one guards him out deep.
So if you play him as like a short roll 4, that's and with how effective he is finishing around the bucket, I've already touched on Ayton's gravity. It's kind of a choice then that the defense has to make when the ball enters the paint. And as you've noted, he's not a great passer, but I'm sure we could, get him to make reads to throw lobs to Ayton if the defense kind of shifts over to TJ
I'll believe
Warren.
it when I see it.
Interestingly, one thing that I didn't expect to see is that Devin Booker's usage doesn't change with TJ Warren on the floor. He's not a great assist guy, as you said, but he's also a very, very low turnover guy for that reason. And I think there's some interesting things we can do to just get him finishing off plays. I'm a big Igor guy, and I think, for a guy like TJ who's not a natural passer, I think we can, put him in some sets that makes the action and the reads very easy for him. Maybe you don't use his passing ability, but, it's been touched on already a lot this summer with how much misdirection that Igor uses. So you could kind of have TJ getting unofficial assists, if we want to call it that, in terms of running action that creates space without the ball in his hands.
If TJ Warren starts, who's going to score on the bench? Are we just going to have Josh Jackson do his summer league thing where he just drives the rim recklessly every single time? The way to develop Josh Jackson to this point is to have him be a third or a fourth option, have him play around Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, and let him find his game, sort of the game that he had at Kansas, where he was the third playmaker on the floor. And obviously Josh is not a great shooter yet, but he, I think, has more potential there than TJ Warren does, because we have a much larger sample of TJ Warren being bad at it. And again, going back to the bench, I think that unit's going to need someone like TJ Warren. It's going to need someone who can volume score at a semi-efficient level, which is what TJ Warren does. Because that's the thing about TJ Warren, too, is if he were just this incredibly efficient scorer who, he was somewhere around 58% true shooting, high effective field goal, I would get it much more. He's really not, though. He's right around league average or a little worse than that. And he just, his volume's good, so that's nice, but it's just he doesn't do anything really well, and particularly not the things that I want as a person who's playing with Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, who I want those guys to just have the most space possible and the most defensive help around them as possible.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a good point, Max, in terms of the bench and how starting TJ affects that, because you kind of move to having a lot of young guys essentially running the second unit. So, I definitely don't have all the answers here. I have an opinion on what I think the Suns will do, and I definitely think that it makes more sense to start TJ right now. But I definitely don't have the answers, and we might get into that in later episodes in terms of what it then means for certain positions in the bench unit. But I think to touch on that real quick, I like Josh in the second unit. I guess similarly in a role that you would hope to get out of TJ. I definitely think that TJ would probably play it better, but I just think overall, holistically, I still prefer TJ in the starting lineup. And then Igor's a great coach. Maybe he'll stagger some things and work out the best ways to have the best lineups out there with a nice balance of scoring options and things. But I guess just to sum it all up from. I don't totally disagree with you on this. I want to make that very clear. My opinion on what the Suns should do with TJ to start this season versus, my opinion on what the Suns should do going forward when trying to build a, contending playoff team are very two different things.
So, David, what if I told you that the future could be now?
I'm all ears, Max.
This conversation's been very focused as a TJ versus Josh Jackson conversation. Are we so sure Mikal Bridges isn't the best option to start at small forward right now?
Again, I guess touching on what I just did, I think I couldn't see the Suns starting him this season straight away.
Why not, though? Why not?
He's a rookie, plain and simple. This team has real aspirations to compete from the get-go. I don't think they're under any illusions that they're going to be a playoff team or anything like that. But, McDonough said it. They want to be the most improved team in the NBA.
Hold on, though. You say, and you admit clearly that you think that the most important thing going forward is for Ayton and Booker to be surrounded by defense and shooting. Is that right?
I do agree with that going forward.
Is there any chance in the world that Josh Jackson and TJ Warren are better than Mikal Bridges at those things right now?
Those two things? No, probably not.
So if those are the two most important things, I feel like if he's already better at those things than they are. I mean, Mikal Bridges is not 19 years old. What is he, 22? he's still a rookie, but he's an older rookie and one who's had a lot of experience playing in big games against the best competition in college basketball, which is obviously not NBA competition, but it doesn't mean he can't shoot, and it doesn't mean that he can't be smart on defense. He's not big enough yet. He'll get pushed around a little bit, but even if he is a rookie on defense, gets pushed around, he's not ready yet, totally physically. He's still going to be better, I think, than both TJ and Josh, and he's definitely going to be a better shooter than them. So to me, it's like, sure, he's a rookie, but like he's still better than those guys at the role we want him to play. Do you understand kind of what I mean?
I totally understand what you mean, Max, and again, I definitely don't disagree with you. The problem for me, and I don't want this to come across as a cop-out, but that would mean starting 2 rookies, a point guard coming off an ACL injury, and a newly signed free agent, plus Devin Booker. And I just don't see the Suns doing that with everything that they've stated so far this offseason. So that's why I rule out Bridges. It's not disagreeing with any of your arguments, because I think you make a hell of a lot of sense. And just to bring TJ back into the conversation, I suppose it's why I keep coming back to him. He's kind of the most experienced, probably for now most effective player to start at that position in terms of just rolling out a lineup that can compete from game one.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't think that Mikal Bridges is going to start. Certainly not to start the season. He may be starting later if he shows that he just needs to start. But yeah, I think the decision is going to be in reality between Josh and TJ. And if I'm going to move on to what I think is going to happen now, I think they're going to start Josh Jackson. And the reason why I think they're going to do that is because, I mean, we all know TJ is not as big of a part of the future of this team as Josh Jackson is. Josh Jackson had that huge second half last season. I think that both the team and the fan base sort of feels some momentum with Josh Jackson, even though his summer league was definitely a speed bump in that momentum. And I think they're going to want to not take him from that starting role where he was the first option and kind of the star of the horrible tanking Suns down the stretch. And I think it's hard for me to see them relegating him to a bench role after all of that.
Yeah, and I think, as you clearly say, that's the other option here. The Mikal stuff is definitely an interesting point for future going forward. But right now it definitely seems to be a TJ versus JJ discussion. Maybe if the start of the season doesn't go all that well, we'll be having a pod where we discuss, should it be time for them to pull the trigger and start Mikal Bridges to get some development in that role for him in the last, say, 20 games of the season, because we have nothing to lose. But in terms of game one and, trying to start the season on a positive note, I think it's definitely TJ versus Josh. And I think, it will be hard, as you say, to go from that kind of primary option without Devin Booker to end the year to saying, pulling Josh aside and saying, you're back to the bench. But there were some encouraging signs for Josh in that role towards the end of the year without Devin Booker. And, it kind of got me thinking that maybe, at least in the short term, he's better off with a role with the ball in his hands a little bit more. And another reason why I kind of struggle to see him in a team with, Brandon Knight, say, running the point and a lot of usage going through Devin Booker. It's kind of, unless you can get Josh to really buy into just being that defensive option in the starting lineup, I'm not sure we get a hell of a lot of development out of him to start the season.
A lot of it's going to depend on how well he's shooting, right? Because if he can shoot, if he's above 30%, and he can do the whole 3-and-D thing reasonably well, it's a lot more viable. It's going to be really tough if he's shooting 25% again.
Yeah, and it was, the reason why it was really tough to see that summer league, we might be having a completely different discussion if a lot of those buckets went in.
Right.
Which is, why we shouldn't overreact to good or bad in summer league, I think, because...
It was 3 games.
It was 3 games. It was probably, I think, fairly by Suns fans judged mainly more to do with shot selection and things rather than the buckets just going in or out. To touch on something that, you and I have spoken on quite a bit, and certainly something that will come up in our point guard specific position episode later in this series. I'm excited for the fact that 2 guys, and, you can add Bridges to that even, are going to go into training camp and battle it out for this position. And it's certainly not just going to be given to a guy because of his salary, for instance, in someone like TJ Warren or given to a guy like Josh purely because of where he was drafted. I think Igor's definitely the kind of coach that'll roll the ball out and let him fight it out.
Yep, that's a nice team-wide thing that's going to occur this year that I think a lot of Suns fans have been calling for a while after Bender and Chris were sort of, given entitled to minutes. So isn't that an argument? So are we understating the chances that Igor rolls the ball out in training camp and in preseason, and Mikal just shows that he obviously earns the job? Because I think you and I probably would both agree that neither Josh nor TJ has demonstrated clearly that they deserve to start in their time, because TJ has been a neutral or negative player the entire time he's been a Sun, and Josh was, he came on towards the end, but he still finishes one of the worst players in the league last year. So neither one's anchored in a spot, in my opinion. So isn't there a chance that Mikal Bridges just deserves it?
It's an interesting point, and I'm not gonna make a statement like fighting out battles for training camp and then totally just, rule Bridges out from winning that spot. I think it's an interesting thing. I'm always really interested in the front office coach dynamics here with these types of decisions. McDonough's clearly played his hand in the trade that he made for Bridges. You give up that much for a guy like Mikal at pick 10, and that's kind of stating your intentions with the type of player that you think he is and what he can be going forward. So, if Bridges has an amazing training camp, you can be pretty sure that the front office will be kind of whispering in Igor's ear.
That's tough though, right? Because while I agree with you on that, because they obviously have that tie to Mikal, they have equal or greater ties to the other two guys too, because they took Josh 4th overall. That was their prize in 2017, and TJ they gave that pretty sizable extension to.
This is probably another thing, and maybe another nice segue in terms of not getting bogged down into the positional stuff with these guys and with even starting positions and things, because I think, one thing I'm pretty confident of is Igor's going to, play the guys that deserve to be played, probably, almost irregardless of position as well. And just throw guys out there that are giving him what he needs. And that's probably just going to be more from an overall talent, competing every night, doing what he's asking standpoint versus, hey, what position do you play? Do I need someone at that position to throw out there? So, I certainly wouldn't rule out 2 of the 3, or sometimes maybe even 3 of the 3 all playing on the floor together in some funky way for Igor as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I one prediction I would make, I think that we're probably going to get a quote along these lines from either or both of Igor or McD. It's going to be something along the lines of we don't really care who starts. This team's going to be morphing around so much that who starts is just the first iteration of our team, and it's just going to be constantly varying and changing throughout the game, and then whoever's playing the best will finish the game. Something like that's going to be said by one or both of those guys.
Yeah, I think Igor will definitely say it. McD's always, pretty good for a quote like that as well.
Yeah.
So, I think you're right there. I think we will hear something like that at some point.
I do share your optimism that Igor, like he will do with every player, he will find something new and interesting for TJ to do that will be something that probably will surprise us a little bit, and it will just be a matter of whether TJ takes to it. So I guess it kind of goes to maybe the point we'll round this up on, and that's that I think we wanted to talk a little bit about how versatile we think that this team is going to be. I think we both see a lot of Ariza at the 3. There might be times where Davon reads at the 3. I don't even know. I just think they're going to try a lot of different things with this team.
Yeah, I think it's why the Ariza signing is so crucial, because he kind of unlocks a lot of that stuff and gives Igor these options. I think on defense, and when we talk about positions here, we're really probably talking about it more from a defensive standpoint, and Ariza's the guy that I see guarding most 4s in the starting lineup if we're kind of slotting him in as the starting power forward, just his length and his history. And if you look at all the Rockets' most effective, most used lineups last year and in the playoffs when it really mattered, it was kind of Ariza and Tucker tied to each other, and those two kind of just flipped between the more appropriate defensive assignment for either one. And that's kind of what I see with TJ and Ariza in the starting lineup. Obviously TJ's nowhere near the defender that Tucker was, but in terms of matching him up on guys, I think you'll see Ariza on the 4 a lot to use his length. And then, they might switch around a little bit if TJ's got a better matchup there. But then, switching to offense, I think Igor's going to want to play really fast, and that's where I see TJ kind of using what he's shown in the NBA so far as, a fast break finisher, really good finisher, piling on the points with Devin Booker from that standpoint. And then when it gets bogged down into the half court and you're trying to use, a guy like Ayton and the gravity that he possesses, that's where I kind of see Ariza slotting in as the 3 in offensive sets and using his kind of floor spacing and making sure we have just enough shooting around Devin Booker. And, that's where TJ then really slots into that small ball 4 role that I'm talking about. And as I said, my article will hopefully have some clips that can illustrate that a little bit more. And
yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep relitigating the TJ Warren thing, but I think I value the space that the mid-range TJ Warren threat gives as much as you do. First of all, the reason why it's called space is because, you want to create more of it, and just, if you're in the mid-range, you're not creating as much as someone who's, way outside. Also, it's not worth as many points. So if the space is not respected and the ball goes to TJ Warren and he shoots, a 15-footer, it's not worth as much as if the ball goes to Ariza and he shoots a 24-footer. I'm looking forward to your article because I want to see a little more clearly kind of what you're conceptualizing here. I'm just having a really hard time conceptualizing this world where Booker and Ayton are going to be running the pick and roll, whatever action they're running on one side of the court, and then this threat of TJ Warren on the other side of the court is going to be something that the opposing defense is just going to have to be freaking out about or paying attention to enough to allow either Booker or Ayton to operate on the other side. Whereas I just see it's just so much more kind of clear and obvious in my mind that if you have Ariza and Mikal Bridges out there, on opposite sides of the court, it's just so obvious to me that the players are going to have to respect both those guys, and it's just going to give Ayton and Booker so much room.
I will hopefully get the article out relatively soon that will kind of illustrate things a little bit more. But to sum it up from that perspective, and kind of agree with what you're saying as well as trying to justify what I'm saying here with TJ, is there's a clip from Igor that I'll share which essentially notes that front offices these days are all about the 3-point shot, the free throw line, and buckets at the rim. And I think what you and I are both saying is trying to create offenses that fit in with that and that optimize that as much as possible. Just where we differ is I believe that can be really optimized with this current roster by using TJ's current NBA skills a little bit more versus, I guess, taking the risk of starting, say, a Bridges or a Josh Jackson.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think that especially holds water for like the first month of the season, right? Because when you first start out, you kind of want things to be stable. I think last season we saw what happens when you have a team start that's not stable. Exactly. Quite the opposite. And I understand what you mean. Like if Mikal Bridges starts and he's great in preseason training camp, but game 1, it's the NBA, it's a brand new thing, he's just deer in the headlights, like that could kind of derail you. So I see your point that TJ Warren is not going to be deer in the headlights. He's played 150 NBA games or however many NBA games he's played. He's not going to be freaking out. So I get it from that perspective. And if it were like anybody else, I think I might agree with you. If it were any other small forward who just had one of the skills of shooting, defense, or passing that I value so much, and someone with Ayton and Booker, I think I'd be there. It's just that TJ is so devoid of all of those things. It makes it really hard for me to get excited about him starting.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that. I think Igor can do some things that limits the damage of TJ's negatives. I've tried to explain that a little bit on this episode, and hopefully the listeners kind of understand that. Hopefully my article will, extend on that a little bit more with some visuals and things. But touching on your point in terms of, going in with a solid group of starters rather than taking risks, I would kind of use Igor's team last year as an example with Utah. I think, I was looking at their roster last offseason and kind of going, do you play Favors as the backup 5 and do some interesting things to create more space, because they had problems with shooting with guys like Ricky Rubio and things starting. And, I was thinking, do you start Ingles and Crowder together as the 2 wings, for instance, and kind of try and optimize the spacing a little bit more? They didn't. They went with Favors as the starting four, and then they kind of staggered some things after that. And, Favors didn't finish sometimes. They had some injuries with Gobert and things changed. But, I kind of really look at them as a nice example here. Again, Favors and TJ Warren are very different players, but it is a nice example where you kind of have that, in theory, discussion around, where's the spacing by having Favors and Gobert on the court together versus what the Jazz actually did and did quite effectively with some interesting, kind of roles for everyone on the court.
Yeah, and fair, but I would point out that the Jazz, first of all, aren't good because of their offense. They're good because of their defense. Their offense is fine. And also, Derek Favors, while you're right that he's not spacing the floor or anything, he's also he's playing defense and he's next to Gobert, so there are other factors at play there. But I mean, you're right, and I think that the overall point here is just that Igor Kokoskov is gonna figure things out to a much better degree than any coach the Suns have had for a very long time. So I think no matter who starts at the three, we can be assured that it's going to be a well thought out decision, and there's going to be a plan for it.
That's probably a really good final point there, Max. Is I am obviously biased with my love for Igor, but I'm certainly not as worried as say I was with Earl Watson with 10 days before the regular season starting, deciding that Josh and TJ were going to start together. And didn't really seem to be a thing.
David, he had Josh Jackson guard Blake Griffin in the second game of the season?
Yeah. The more I think about it, the less surprised I am that he got fired 3 games into an NBA season, Max.
They had to. They had to.
So yeah, Igor's definitely not going to go in with that little preparation for these guys. I think he will essentially make his decision in training camp, and they will get many, many repetitions into making sure that it's maximized to its fullest come game one.
And the last thing I'll say on that, and then we can go on to 7 seconds or less, is that people probably think we sound like giant homers talking about Igor the way we talk about him. The views on him are raving around the league. The Dunked On podcast, which trashes the Suns pretty regularly and did again in their offseason grades. Actually, the one thing they praised pretty heavily was the Igor hiring, which apparently people all around the league are applauding the Suns for. So, no matter how you feel about 8 versus Doncic, no matter how you feel about the Mikal trade, I think Suns fans can unanimously feel good about Igor.
I'm still calling him the biggest, best move for the Suns this summer. So, and that includes getting the number 1 pick, drafting Ayton, signing Ariza. I think it's still all eclipsed by bringing in a very competent head coach and someone that I'm tying myself to, and hopefully makes me look good in 3 seasons' time with a massive extension for the Suns.
Serbian Brad Stevens. Yeah, if he sucks, you have to delete your Twitter account. You know that, right?
I just have to stop following or covering the Suns, I think.
Sort of like me with Luka and Jaren Jackson. All right, let's go on to 7 seconds or less. 7 seconds or less, for those of you who are new listeners, is the segment where one of us asks the other one 3 questions for which the other has not prepared and for which the other only has 7 seconds or less to respond, except we never actually follow that rule. David, are you ready?
I am ready, Max.
Okay, I think this is going to be a fun one. I'm proud of this one. So, it's going to be the same theme. We're talking about the same guys, so it's not going to be hard for you to shift gears here. 3 skills, okay? The 3 skills are going to be the center of this discussion here, and the 3 skills are Mikal Bridges' shooting ability, Josh Jackson's sort of overall athleticism / coordination / physical ability for his size thing, that whole thing. The reason why Josh Jackson's Josh Jackson. And then TJ Warren's just unreal finishing, ability around the basket, the thing that TJ Warren does the best. So basically the 3 guys' best skills, right?
I'm with you.
Question number 1. You are able to copy one of those skills from one of those guys and give it to one of the other ones. You're not taking it away, you're just copying it. Which of those skills do you take from which one, and to whom do you give it to?
I'm giving Bridges shooting to Josh Jackson.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good answer, and that's what I expect you to say, and that's what I would have said.
Yeah, I'll extend on that real quick because I feel like we've robbed Josh a little bit in this episode of not focusing on him too much. But I'm still a very firm believer in Josh Jackson as a player. I think as he bulks out and, gets a more NBA ready body for the position that he's going to be asked to play, and if he can add a shot that's anywhere near as effective as Mikal Bridges looks to be, I think he could still live up to where he was picked in the draft.
I agree, and another point that I'll make on Josh is that by all accounts, that dude is just the hardest of workers. He's a fiery personality. He's not going to fail unless he's just destined to fail. That guy will succeed if there's a chance.
Yep, totally agree.
Okay, so here's question 2, and this is harder. This time you don't get to copy one skill from one of the others and give it to the other. You have to take it away from the person and give it to one of the others.
Okay. Give me TJ Warren's finishing and give it to Josh.
Yep, that was going to be my answer too. I think that's the right answer.
Which I think will come, as I alluded to, with Josh filling out and being able to absorb contact, and that's where he's going to become extremely effective as an NBA player, and we'll see him start attacking, guys challenging him at the rim a little bit more and kind of yakking in guys' faces.
Yeah, so I agree with you to an extent. I don't think it's going to come in terms of, I don't think he's ever going to have TJ Warren's crazy weird touch thing, because you don't just get that. But yeah. I do agree that he's going to be a lot more effective at going to the rim because he's going to draw just a ton of fouls. He just needs to improve his free throw percentage, obviously. But if he does that, it's going to be, he's going to live at the line.
Yep. Repetition.
Okay, so for this last question, we're going to change Mikal's shooting to his defensive versatility stuff, okay?
Okay.
All right, so now we're taking one of these 3 skills, Mikal's defensive versatility, JJ's athleticism, TJ's finishing, and you get to give one of those things to Devin Booker. Which one do you give him?
Ooh, definitely Mikal's defensive versatility, I think. I'm a little cautious here because I thought Josh Jackson was going to bring real NBA-ready defensive versatility straight away, but I'm very much bought into what Bridges is going to be able to do there from hopefully day one. And that inside Devin Booker's body and inside what Devin Booker can currently do on the other end, you've got a pretty surefire, top 5, top 3 NBA player, I reckon.
Yeah, I think that's my answer too, but I was very tempted to give Devin Booker Josh Jackson athleticism.
Yeah, I think Devin's sneaky athletic. I think I tweeted out recently, I was looking through his kind of draft combine stuff. Admittedly, a lot of guys didn't actually test, but, he topped the class in kind of the agility test and some speed tests. And, we occasionally see him get up for, that, I remember there's that left-handed dunk that I remember that didn't actually end up counting. I think it was maybe on Marc Gasol. He's never going to have Josh's athleticism for sure, but with how much I'm seeing him work this offseason as well, and how much we know he just works overall, I wouldn't be totally surprised if we see a even more athletic Devin Booker this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and that's why ultimately I wouldn't take JJ's athleticism and give it to him, because I think you're right that Mikal's defensive versatility is just something that he doesn't have, and you could just give it to him. But at the same time, before the first game of Summer League, I know you watched on TV, but if you were there, all Josh Jackson did was just do insane, between the legs, 360 dunks for 15 straight possessions. So Devin Booker's not doing that. So I think that'd be kind of fun if you give that to him.
Yep, that was fun.
Cool. I think that's it for us. You can follow me at MaxMCC11 on Twitter. You can follow David at the 4 Point Play on Twitter, and you can follow our podcast at 7SOL Pod on Twitter. David, thank you so much for joining me on this. This was fun.
This was really fun, and looking forward to diving into some of the other ones and with some guests, as you alluded to, in the future.
Thanks, guys.